thank the judge for allowing us to use his courtroom today. And friends and fellow citizens of this great republic, I thank you for the honor of your invitation. And against poor Richard's advice to neither borrower nor lender be, I am most grateful for your lended attention for the next few moments. It's a peculiar pleasure for a man born in 1706 to find himself still invited to speak 3 centuries hence. I might conclude that my ideas have endured remarkably well, or your committee was just unable to find a more adequate speaker willing to work for 18th century wages. With your gracious permission, allow me to share a pair of stories with you today. The first, that of my life. The second, the American colonies that became their own country. They're not the same tale, yet they are inseparably intertwined, that one may scarcely be told one without the other. I was born in Boston in January of 1706, the 15th child of 17. Born to my father Josiah and my dear mother Abiah, the youngest son of the youngest son for 5 generations. Being one among 17 children definitely teaches many useful lessons in life. One learns patience and economy and negotiation and the importance of arriving early for something. My father intended me for the clergy, but his purse proved less ambitious than his hopes and my abilities for arithmetic. I only studied my formal education for a scant 2 years and ended when I was but 10. But my education never ended. It only continued because books became my constant companion. When I would not borrow, the scarce coins I could spare found their way into bookshops to find something else to read. Among the volumes that shaped me most were works like Plutarch's Lives, Addison and Steele's The Spectator magazine, where I learned to write, Pilgrim's Progress by Bunyan, the Holy Scripture, other works of history and philosophy and science and moral reflection. But from Plutarch I learned the examples of republics. From Addison and Steele I learned clarity of expression. From experience I learned humility. I assure you, in school, there is no greater tuition than that of experience. As a youth, I was apprenticed to my brother after spending but a moment in my father's chandlery shop. If you do not know what a chandler is, he made soap and candles. And so you can imagine that it was quite the sticky and unsightly work, not to mention the aroma. But I was apprenticed to my brother James as a printer when I was but 12 or 13. And there I learned the trade that would shape my entire life and shape this republic. Printing is a marvelous profession. It permits a young man to borrow wisdom from minds that are much greater than his own and to discuss and to distribute it to thousands around. I delighted in writing. My brother did not always delight in the same, but to have my essays published, I and a young lady by the name of Silas Duguid conspired and pushed letters under the door of his New England Courant once every fortnight. Developed with her an inseparable relationship that carried with me through the remainder of my life. The letters proved very, very popular, but my brother was pleased until he discovered the author's relationship to Mrs. Duggar. Needless to say, brotherly love was not something that I was attributed at that moment. So at 17, I fled as a fugitive from my apprenticeship, and after a brief stop in New York, I arrived in the great city of Philadelphia. I arrived almost penniless. My apprentice at danger. My appearance was not especially distinguished, as I had been through much. A long journey by a scow to New York, and then another vessel to Philadelphia, which sunk, and I had to swim ashore. So you can imagine the appearance that I had. As I walked on Market Street on that Sunday that I arrived, going into a baker's shop asking for 2 pennyworth of bread. The shopkeeper had no idea what I was speaking of, because in Philadelphia it was much different than that of Boston. But nevertheless, he sold me 3 puffy loaves of bread. I put one under each arm and put the other one in my mouth and began to eat it as I walked down Market Street. And you will be glad to know that the wonderful woman that would become my wife, Miss Deborah Reed, was standing in the doorway that morning and watched as I processed with those 2 puffy loaves under my scant dress and tiresome look. Yet, all of that, if someone had looked at that inconsolable young man walking the street that morning and told them that one day he would be the signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he would negotiate with kings, and he would help frame a constitution for a republic, they no doubt would have suggested stronger medicine. Yet, America possessed something that was extraordinary. It was a place where advancement depended less upon birth and more upon industry. Poor Richard wrote in his almanac, "Diligence is the mother of good luck." Many men speak of luck as though it rains down from heaven, but I generally found that it rises up from honest labor. These colonies were imperfect, with all of our rivalries and disagreements and prejudices and shortcomings, enough to fill one of His Majesty's ships of the line. Yet opportunity existed. A man could improve his condition with hard work. For you see, industry need not wish. That principle became the very foundation of our American character. As for my printing business, it prospered, and I undertook the noblest question in the world: what good may I do in it? You might recall that I assembled a small company of artisans and tradesmen there in Philadelphia that enjoyed the same curious minds and sober character, and we met on Friday evenings in an association that we called the Juto. This humble society, we sought, through long conversation, to accomplish things in Philadelphia that would be an improvement. Those enterprises arose from conviction that citizens working together could improve much. Indeed, one of the greatest strengths of this America has always been voluntary association. You see, free people need not wait for the government to solve every difficulty of our lives. They may cooperate to do it themselves. I often remark that well done is better than well said, and it remains one of my favorite observations. You see, speeches have their place, especially one that is paid. Yet action remains the truest measure of conviction and virtue. As years passed, my interest expanded. Curiosity was my greatest vice, and I found no decent cure for my disease. I studied weather, I studied ocean currents, I studied economics, I studied public health, and as you might be aware, I studied electricity. If I accomplished anything of consequence in science, I must say that it was not my doing. It was to the owing, in no small measure, to my dear wife, Deborah. While I chased lightnings and libraries and other curiosities, she managed our home and our business and tended to our shop and oversaw all of our affairs and provided the steady foundation upon which all of my wanderings were built. Much the same can be said for the many days and years that we spent apart to establish this republic. My greatest regret in all of life is that as I was in London serving as a colonial agent, she died without me by her side. Many of you may remember my kite experiment that brought me considerable fame. Had it gone otherwise, it probably would have simply bought me a shorter obituary. The experiment demonstrated that lightning and electricity were common phenomena. More importantly, it reflected a larger principle. The universe cooperates and operates according to discoverable laws. The belief encouraged science. It also encouraged liberty, and for it, truth today may be investigated freely. And those ideas were the very ones that prompted our very exposition. You see, a free society depends upon open inquiry. The same spirit that asks how lightning behaves may also ask how governments ought to behave. As tensions grew between Britain and her colonies, I initially sought reconciliation. You see, I loved England, and I thought that we had much to offer in a grand empire. I admired her constitutional tradition. You know, many today assume that our independence was inevitable, but I will tell you it was not. For you see, for years, I and others sought accommodation. We petitioned, we reasoned, we negotiated. I spent years in London attempting to preserve harmony between Britain and America as a colonial agent for several of these colonies. Yet events increasingly persuaded many colonists that our rights were endangered. Not just the right of speech, not just the right of representation, but the rights that we had been endowed and promised as Englishmen were very much at risk. You see, not long after I arrived in London, during the bloody end to the winter in 1770, an 11-year-old boy named Christopher Snyder was shot and killed in the streets of Boston by a British customs agent. Just 3 weeks later, there were others, including Crispus Attucks, who were gunned down by British soldiers on King Street. You've come to know that as the Boston Massacre. You see, the issue was not simply just taxation. The issue was principle. Could free people be governed without their consent? Could distant authorities exercise power without accountability? You see, those questions touch the very foundation of the liberty that we sought. The ideas that animated our very resistance did not spring forth suddenly in 1776. They were rooted in centuries of thought and sermons that had been preached in these very colonies. The Romans spoke of civic virtue. The Greek explored public republican government. The Scriptures affirmed the dignity of all men. John Locke articulated natural rights. Thomas Paine offered common sense. And the English constitutional tradition limited arbitrary power. And America inherited these ideas and these ideals as we sought to apply them. And in 1775, American blood again was once more spilled and soaked into the soil in Lexington and Concord. The Continental Congress had petitioned the Crown with an olive branch, which was rebuffed. By 1776, the crisis had reached its climax. The Continental Congress assembled in Philadelphia and received the Crown's proclamation of our treasonous guilty verdict without a trial. Having returned just a few months earlier from London, I joined that remarkable group in Congress and colleagues, men like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Roger Sherman and Robert Livingston, John Hancock, all of them. You see, when we were selected as the Committee of Five to write the Declaration of Independence, Mr. Jefferson drafted the Declaration, and the task fell largely to a younger man with a finer pen than even mine. The signers risked everything as they pledged to one another for the Declaration their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors. You see, liberty has never been and never will be free. The Revolutionary War tested our young nation severely. At one of its darkest moments in 1776 of October, I was sent to France. And I discovered something very unexpected. French society regarded me as a celebrity. I had crossed an ocean to secure military assistance and found myself treated like a fashionable frontier philosopher. So permit me to assure you that there are few diplomatic advantages greater than convincing a foreign nation that a printer is somehow glamorous. But yet behind the humor and the fur hat lay serious work. Diplomacy requires patience and persuasion, and occasionally the ability to smile while listening to ideas one considers entirely ridiculous, albeit by God's providence and the sacrifice of countless patriots. By 1781, Independency was effectually secured, and by 1783 it had been signed in parchment by all involved. Yet, victory created a new challenge. How should free people govern themselves? Winning liberty is difficult, but preserving it is even harder. The Articles of Confederation proved completely inadequate and ineffective to the exigencies of the new nation. Success required a stronger framework that preserved the family members while maintaining the house in which we all resided. For you see, a family of 13 may dwell under one roof, though each child has a different appetite and opinion and volume of voice. But without household rules, the loudest child becomes king and the smallest child becomes a rebel. And a nation is no different. We require not fewer opinions, but better arrangements for living with them all. Thus, in 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia in May for the Constitutional Convention. By then, I was an old man, 80 years old. By today's standards, relatively young. One of them, as we stood together, we recognized the grandness and necessity of the moment. But yet, having been through many things in the prior decades, being the oldest member of that delegation and that Congress, I required assistance to stand, and I had to be carried back and forth from my home in a sedan chair each day. And I spoke less and listened more than in many of my earlier years. You see, age teaches you many things. One of them is that listening occasionally proves useful, and that the delegates disagreed frequently. Large states and small states differed. Regional interests conflicted and strong personalities collided. In other words, it was a convention of politicians. You see, the Constitution that emerged established a government of limited authority and separated powers and checks and balances against them all. More importantly, it reflected a sober understanding of human nature. The framers did not assume that men were angels, by no means. Indeed, after a lifetime of public affairs, I could confidently report to the contrary. Power was divided because concentrated power invites abuse. Liberty is protected not merely by good intentions, but by sound structures. And when the convention concluded, a lady outside the hall, standing at the top of the stairs, asked of me what government had been created. And I replied, "Madam, a republic, if you can keep it." It depends, you see, upon its people. A republic cannot be kept by parchments. It cannot be preserved by institutions. It depends upon its citizens. The responsibility belongs to you. Early in my life, as I crossed the Atlantic for the second time, I formulated an effort of moral perfection through 13 virtues. Things like temperance and order and frugality and justice and cleanliness and humility, as well as others. And I must admit, I never mastered them fully. Indeed, I sometimes suspected humility to be of particularly an elusive nature. Yet striving mattered. You see, self-government begins with governing oneself. A people incapable of self-restraint eventually invite eternal and external restraints. A republic requires character. It requires honesty. It requires responsibility. It requires citizens willing to place public good above immediate self-interest. You see, the ancients understood this. Plutarch's heroes taught it repeatedly. Cicero warned that republics depended upon virtue. And history confirms their judgments. Nations seldom collapse because they lack resources. They collapse because they lose character. Like character and virtue, a republic perseveres on the shoulders of an educated and an informed people. I have oft said the doorstep to this temple of wisdom is knowledge of our own ignorance. But being ignorant is not so much a shame as being unwilling to learn. I helped establish libraries and schools and set type in virtual darkness to illuminate others. Not solely for profit, but because knowledge is the ally of liberty. As my pulchritudinous Mrs. Dogwood wrote in her 8th letter on July the 9th, 1722, without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. Ah, my friends, a republic is not preserved by stone walls and standing armies and even the wisdoms of the laws alone, but by the memory of its people. When a nation forgets the labors and sacrifices and hard-earned lessons of its forebears, it is much like a ship that casts away its charts and then wonders why it strikes the rocks. To remember history is not merely to honor the dead. It is to instruct the living. For the same follies that endangered liberty in one age are ever present to revisit another. Should vigilance and memory fall asleep. Thus, of you gathered here in service to historical foundation, you perform an important work. History provides perspective. It reminds us that freedom was purchased dearly. It reminds us that progress is not certain. It reminds us that ordinary people, just as you and I, can accomplish extraordinary things. The American Revolution was not by famous founders alone. It depended upon farmers, merchants, mothers, sons, daughters, ministers, printers, soldiers, sailors, blacksmiths, artisans, and countless others whose names appear nowhere on a monument or set in time. This republic belongs to them as much as it does to Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton and Franklin. I've always preferred usefulness to fame. Because you see, fame is pleasant enough, but usefulness is better. As poor Richard declared, he that lives upon hope will die fasting. Hope alone is completely insufficient. Citizens must act. Vote thoughtfully. Study diligently. Work honestly. Serve generously. Debate civilly. Teach deliberately. Preserve institutions that preserve liberty. And remember that freedom survives only when each generation chooses to sustain it. My friends, every generation inherits America anew. You're not merely beneficiaries of the Republic. We're trustees of its greatness. The principles of 1776 are not museum relics. They remind us as living obligations. Keep liberty alive in your homes. Keep it alive in your schools. Keep it alive in your churches, in your civic organizations, and in your communities. Keep it alive in public life. Teach your children not only where freedom comes, but what freedom requires. For rights endure only when accompanied by responsibility. And now, as I conclude, please permit an old printer one final reflection. When I look upon America, I do not see perfection. No more than I saw in that Continental Congress or in that Constitutional Convention. But I see something rare. I see a nation founded upon principles rather than ancestry. A nation capable of correcting its errata because it acknowledges standards that are written in those documents higher than any earthly power. A nation that believes, though flawed, ordinary people can govern themselves. Such a republic is no doubt worth preserving. Such a republic is worth defending. Such a republic is worth perfecting. So if you possess a glass, which none of us do today, I pray that you would raise it with me. If not, raise at least your thoughts. For the worthy toast is measured less by what's in the vessel than by what's in the heart. So I invite you now to join me in a toast to the United States of America. May her liberty ever be guided by virtue. May her prosperity ever be tempered by gratitude and demonstrated in generosity. May her power ever be restrained by justice. May her people remain industrious, informed, and free. May knowledge continue to enlighten her counsels. May courage sustain her in times of trial. May charity soften her divisions. And may this republic, if we keep it, continue to bless mankind for centuries yet to come. In colonial words, we concluded with the word huzzah. Would you do that with me? Huzzah! To America. May she ever be worthy of her freedom. And now, my friends, I am most grateful for your kindness of attention and your generosity with your patience. May you leave this place resolved to preserve the blessings of liberty, not to cherish the lessons of history, but to improve both ourselves and our country as opportunity permits us. For remember, a republic is like a roof. It seldom leaks all at once. It is neglected one shingle at a time. I wish you good health, good fortune, and good company. And if after hearing me today, you find yourselves any wiser, give the credit to experience. If you find yourselves merely amused, I shall gladly claim all responsibility. As your humble and obedient servant, I bid you farewell with a generous portion of providence and goodwill. To you. artifacts from our revolutionary experience on the table over here. If you would like to spend some time, I'm happy to stay for a few moments, take pictures, explain some of the artifacts. You're welcome to pick them up. If you do, just be careful, especially the arm that's at the very front of the table. It is very, very heavy. Everything else is fairly light. But you're welcome to pick it up, explore it. How else do we know history until we've held it in our hands and shared it with those that are around us? May you have a wonderful day.